Hello. I'm going to talk to you about Maajid Nawaz. He's an interesting fellow and was a radio presenter on LBC until yesterday morning, I believe. Technically, he still is a radio presenter. Here he is on the LBC website in their list of presenters, and so far as I understand it, his contract runs out only in April. So they'll still have to pay him, won't they? He was sacked without any ifs, ands or buts for saying the wrong thing. In this case, he was talking about COVID. I made a video a few months ago about the sacking of an Isle of Man, a Manx radio presenter called Stu Peters, who was sacked for returning the comment to somebody who said Black Lives Matter on air by responding All Lives Matter, and apparently that wasn't to the taste of his bosses because he was suspended, and thereafter he was stopped from talking. He could just present records, and he finally he was forced out. He was constructively dismissed. Fate was good to Mr. Peters, though, I'm very pleased to be able to tell you. He then got elected to the Manx Parliament, and I understand that the Manx Radio will have to be very nice to him from now on, because he will be one of the people in charge of the funding. I'm just saying that in case Mr. Nawaz is listening to this. It might be an idea. Now, let's tell you about Maajid Nawaz, because he's a bit of a renegade. He always was a bit of a renegade, and I'm sure he always will be a bit of a renegade. He was born in Southend-on-Sea, which is hardly a hotspot for Muslim fundamentalism, although his parents were both of Pakistani origin, but his mother was a more secular type of person. It's described in Wikipedia as a literature-loving, liberal woman. And again, she was brought up in Southend. Again, as I say, hardly a hotspot of radicalism. His father is also a bit of a rebel. At one point in his life, it says here, he worked for a company in Pakistan that banned trade unions, and he started a court case to get a trade union started. So this is a family that does seem to have a tendency to swim against the tide, which, you know, that's all to the good. I am full of admiration for such people. It says here, Nawaz was educated at Westcliff High School for Boys, again, hardly a madrasa, and then he studied law and Arabic at SOAS, the School of African and Oriental Studies in the University of London, which does have a reputation for Muslim radicalism along the line. And he got his master's degree in the London School of Economics, which has a reputation for, well, radicalism along the line. However, Nawaz says that what put him on the path to Muslim radicalism was a certain amount of racism he came across. Some of it, as I understand, quite violent. I'm really sorry about that. Not nice. Still not an excuse for being a radical, but he happened to join a group of people who used to meet up, I don't know what, every week or so, and somebody played videos of Muslims being persecuted in some way, you know, Bosnian Muslims and massacres and that sort of thing. And Nawaz was exposed to this. I'm not saying all of them were lies, for sure. The Bosnians were cruelly persecuted by the Serbians, but then let's face it, the Bosnians weren't so dusty themselves when they got hold of Serbian victims too. It's a matter of what you're showing films of, isn't it? But Nawaz was extremely exercised by all of this constant feeding of persecution complex, and he joined Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is a radical Muslim group. What happened was that as part of his course, he had to go to Egypt and experience the Muslim world. Well, he did that, and then he was discovered to be a member of Hizb ut-Tahrir, and he was imprisoned. And in jail in Egypt, he met a lot of radicals similarly in prison, and it turns out he didn't like them very much. The thing about Nawaz is that he happens to think for himself. So when he saw racism in the West, he became angry and started to think of how he could deal with it, and he saw Islam as the way to deal with it. When he got to Islam and discovered that they were just as bad or even worse, he started to re-evaluate his opinions. And when he got back to the UK, with the help of people from Amnesty International, I might say, which is a group of non-Muslims mostly, or a good deal of non-Muslims anyway, he started an anti-radical group which ended up being called the Quilliam Foundation. And then he got a job on London Broadcast Radio, or whatever it's called now, LBC anyway. And then he started irritating Islam, because he came up with the idea of what he called a secular Islam. Frankly, I think he's completely wrong with that. I don't think that's possible. I like the idea, but it's a bit like communism. It's great in theory, but in practice, it never seems to work out that well. And I've often been puzzled by Nawaz's apparent inability to see, because he's obviously an extremely intelligent chap. Maybe he's far more intelligent than me and he can see something I can't. That's always possible. Anyway, he's spending a lot of time needling Muslims, and one of them was tweeting a Jesus and Mo cartoon. I'll find a little clip and I'll put it up here, which is why I'm not going to monetize this, am I? Oh dear. And then there was a famous case in October 2016, the American organisation, the Southern Poverty Law Centre, put Nawaz on a list of anti-Muslim extremists. And Nawaz started a lawsuit, and 2 years later the SPLC apologised and paid nearly $3,400,000 to Nawaz and Quilliam to fund their work, which they had to stab in, to fund their work to fight anti-Muslim bigotry and extremism. They had to say that. Now, what I want to know is, where did the SPLC get all that money from? I mean, it is called the Southern Poverty Law Centre, and apparently they had enough money that they could throw around libels, slanders, or whatever that happened to be, to various people, and then just cough up, after a court case, I might say, which was probably expensive in its own right, cough up well over $3 million. I mean, I wouldn't mind them pushing $3 million my way. It says here, their statement was, since we published the field guide. Now you wonder how many other people have been calumnied by that, people who can't afford that sort of a lawsuit. Anyway, that's beside the point for the moment. We've taken the time to do more research. You'd think they'd have taken the time before, wouldn't you, before trying to destroy someone's character, and have consulted with human rights advocates we respect. We found that Mr. Nawaz and Quilliam have made valuable and important contributions, and we apologise for our error. That's what they say. So Nawaz has done a lot of criticising of the regressive left, which he describes as left-leaning people who pander to Islamism, which he defines as a global totalitarian theopolitical project. And there you have his whole idea. What Nawaz is most worried about is tyranny. That is his fear, that people are getting above themselves, trying to dictate what people say. So it's hardly surprising that he then, in the COVID situation, made this video. Now, I won't be able to run this video with the sound because I'm probably going to get a copyright strike on it. At least I'm trying to protect myself against this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to broadcast it with subtitles. All right, so I'm just going to play this bit. Take a back seat for a moment. He points out that the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has said, Plan A, we're not going to have vaccine passports. Plan B, we're going back to tyranny. And by tyranny, Nawaz means that lockdowns, mandates of various sorts. What Nawaz didn't say was that the vaccine only stops you developing the worst of the symptoms. It doesn't stop you from getting the bug in the first place, nor from passing it on. And that's, in my opinion, that's an important part. As I keep saying, but if any of you don't know my stuff yet, I did get myself vaccinated. I am old and I have a long history of respiratory problems. So I thought I'd just do what I had to do to protect myself. Also, I thought, well, I am old. If something is horrendously wrong with the vaccine and it shows up on me, I'd rather it did that than on the children. So that was another thing that was going through my mind. But that's sort of side issue. I'm just saying that because I want you to know I am in no way opposed to vaccinations for those people who want it. But if anyone doesn't want a vaccine, I am absolutely opposed to them being persecuted for it, especially in this situation, because as we have learnt, the vaccine doesn't stop me from contracting the disease and then being asymptomatic and passing it on to everybody I pass in the street. Because COVID, this particular Omicron is so contagious that anyone can get it apparently from just turning the doorknob that I put my hand on 5 minutes before. Okay, so he's talking about tyranny, and that is the thing that frightens him the most. It's drilled into his mind. He's seen tyranny in its absolute naked state in a prison in Egypt, and that's had a profound effect on him, even more than the beatings up or the threats, whatever it was, he got as a young Pakistani teenager in Southend. And you have to understand that when you're listening to what he says. Anyway, what triggers Plan B, he says, is a crisis in the health. What puts us back to tyranny would be a crisis in the health service. And then he points out that the government is going to sack 100,000 care workers. I don't know whether it's that many, but it's certainly going to be a lot, because they won't take the vaccine. And then he says this, and this is what got him into the most trouble. Are you telling me they're not setting us up for the very crisis in the care sector that triggers Plan B? which is a mandated domestic vaccine passport. Can anyone not see what's going on? Look, I disagree with him there. I don't think that the government is planning this. I think they're just bumbling from, like a pinball ball bouncing about from one zing to the other. But certainly it's going to end up like this. Somebody, I don't remember who said this, but I'd rather be led by a clever bastard than a soft-hearted fool, something like that. Because the soft-hearted fools are the ones who do lead you over the cliff. At least a clever bastard won't lead you over the cliff out of sheer self-preservation. Anyway, then he says it's creepy. Well, it is creepy. I don't think he is being entirely logical about it, but I do understand why he's speaking like this. And of course, that is against the current orthodoxy, so he has to go. He has been removed from his seat at LBC, and even though they've got to pay him until April, probably, he will be silenced, they hope. Mr. Nawaz, don't be silenced. Start your own podcast, vlog, or whatever. I'm sure there'll be plenty of people who will be still be interested in talking to you. And actually, if you do happen to see this, get in touch. I'd like to talk to you myself. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Graniopteryx design or Grambo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.graniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.